Hello, I'm Ashley and I'm from Yorkshire, and today our speaker is Kate Raworth, who is an ecological economist and creator of the doughnut. I assume most of you know that, considering you've signed up for the talk. It's a concept that aims to meet the needs of people within the means of the living planet. And she's the co-founder of the Doughnut Economics Action Lab. Her internationally best-selling book, Doughnut Economics: 7 Ways to Think Like a 21st Century Economist, has been translated into 20 languages and has been widely influential with diverse audiences, from the UN General Assembly and Pope Francis to Extinction Rebellion. Kate is a senior associate at Oxford University's Environmental Change Institute and a professor of practice at Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. Kate's career has taken her from working with micro-entrepreneurs in villages of Zanzibar to co-authoring the Human Development Report for the UNDP in New York. This has been followed by a decade as a senior researcher at Oxfam. Kate has written extensively for media, including The Guardian and The New Statesman.
Sorry? Yeah.
Okay, sorry. And has contributed to many radio programs, including BBC Radio 4 and the World Service, as well as television, including CNN, BBC, and ITV. And that is me handing over now to Kate to take us on with her talk.
Thank you, Ashley. That's a lovely introduction. And it's really, really good to join all of you here today. So I'm going to talk about doughnuts. I have to say, I never would have imagined that I would find myself talking about doughnuts. I don't even eat doughnuts, but I think the shape of doughnuts is incredibly powerful. And I'm going to make that clear why. So I'm going to share my screen so I can get some doughnuts there straight away. This is the only donut that actually turns out to be good for us, okay? So you don't actually need to eat donuts, because the best one is conceptual. And I think it really helps us redefine the shape of progress. So I'm going to talk about, can humanity live within the donut? And let me just start by saying I'm 51 years old. That means I was at school in the late 1980s, like I was your age in the late 1980s. And I didn't study economics at school, but I really wanted to study it at university. So when I got to university, I was learning as fast as I could and trying to catch up with what some people around me had already learned. And it took me a little while to realize that I was really frustrated and disappointed by the economics I was taught. And I'm going to kick off there. So whether or not you've studied any economics, I'm going to give you a little crash course in what I think are 3 really powerful ideas that sit under almost all the economics that's still taught in schools and in universities worldwide. And I think these ideas don't serve us. So I'm going to summarize 20th century economics in 3 pictures. I'm going to do a lot of pictures here today. So the first image, what's the first image we're taught? What's the selfie? What are we told humanity looks like? And what's the goal? The first image, I've gone around the world talking about doughnut economics, and every time I find myself in a room surrounded by students who've studied economics, I say, okay, what's the first diagram you remember learning? And it's the same answer. I've got the same answer almost every time. Supply and demand. Everyone says supply and demand. It's how the market works. So right when we begin economics, we put the market at the center of our vision. And that's a strange thing to do, because economics comes from 2 ancient Greek words, ekos and nomos. It means the art of household management. If you just think about that, the art of household management. And if we're going to manage our planetary household, that's an amazing thing to aim to do. And I think it's quite weird to say, welcome to the art of household management in the 21st century. Here is the market. It's one tiny part of the way we manage our planetary home. But by starting with the market, we put markets at the center of our vision, as if the economy is the market. We make price the metric of concern. So on this diagram, you see price is there, and it means we're suddenly talking in terms of money. Well, we don't have to talk about the economy in terms of money, but suddenly we find that's the metric, and we lean towards putting a price value on as many things as possible. That's a choice. So I don't think we should start economics here. That troubles me. Let me go to the second image. What about the selfie, the portrait of humanity? Anyone who's studied economics will know there's a character at the center of the theory. He's called Rational Economic Man. And his portrait's never actually drawn in the textbooks, but I think pictures are really powerful. So I drew him, and he'd have to look a bit like this. He would be a man with no dependents, no kids, no parents to look after. He's got standing on his own, independent in his choices and his beliefs and his preferences. He's got money in his hand. That's how he interacts with the world, through the market. He's got ego in his heart, what I want, my self-interest. And he's got a calculator in his head. He's constantly calculating the relative prices and the opportunity cost of everything. And he's got nature at his feet, as if the rest of the living world is somehow a resource, natural capital for us to use. The real problem with this character is researchers have found that the more that students at school and university are taught that he is like us, that this is a good model of us, we actually become more like him. We start to mimic him. We start to admire him. So university students say over the years of studying economics, they more tend to say, yep, self-interest and competition are really valuable traits in an economist, rather than say altruism, caring for others, and collaboration. So who we tell ourselves we are shapes who we become. And that means it really matters the portrait we create of ourselves. If 10 billion human beings are going to thrive together on this planet, I think this portrait of rational economic man really does not serve us. In fact, it undermines our chances. The last picture, it's the goal. Now, when I studied economics for 4 years at university, I don't remember once being in a conversation with my lecturers and my tutors about what's the goal of the economy, because it was implicit. It was an implicit goal that the goal lies in growth, and an economy that's growing and has GDP growth, gross domestic product, or national income is growing, that's a successful economy. And I think that's just far too quick an assumption to make, because I live, well, we're all in one of the world's richest countries right now, in the UK. And yet this country is richer than almost any nation in the whole history of humanity has ever been before. And yet many people live in real situation of deprivation. Our country has serious environmental problems, and our politicians and our economists tend to believe that the solution to our problems lies with yet more growth, endlessly. It doesn't stop. I think this is an insanity. So I really want to question that. So these three ideas, I believe, really underpin certainly my education. And if they underpin my education at the age of 51, that means they underpin the education of most people in very powerful positions, whether they're ministers and politicians, whether they're business leaders and economists or lawyers or journalists of my generation. We were formed by these ideas, and I think they're holding us back, because the 21st century has begun with multiple crises. Let's think about the financial meltdown in 2008, the global financial crisis that has had a very long tail of impact in many, many people's lives. Thinking of the era of climate and ecological breakdown that we know we live in, that has given rise to many protest movements, from Extinction Rebellion to Standing Rock. And there's a crackdown on protesters around the world now. We're seeing governments responding and pushing back that voice that's rising up. And then we've all just lived through 2 years of COVID lockdown, a pandemic that makes us question the very organization of our societies and what kind of policies are possible. And of course, now there is conflict in Ukraine, with Ukraine and Russia driving challenging context of fuel crisis and food price crisis around the world as a result. So there are multiple challenges that keep rising up. And I think these all show us how connected we are to each other and to the rest of the living world. And these crises, I believe, arise from a system that depends upon endless growth and endless expansion. An endlessly expanding financial sector creates a bubble and its own crash. Endless use of fossil fuels will break down the stability of our climate. An endless expansion of humanity into areas where wildlife lives, coupled with ever-increasing travel by plane between countries, that creates perfect conditions for a global health pandemic. So this made me ask the question, is there a new vision of the shape of progress that's not dependent upon endless growth? And that's what made me draw a donut. So you can think of this donut as a compass for human prosperity, a compass for well-being that gives us a direction we want to go in. Think of humanity's use of Earth's resources radiating out from the center of that picture. So the hole in the middle is a place where people are falling short on the essentials of life. That's why that arrow says shortfall. It's where people do not have the healthcare, education, housing, food, political voice, income, gender equality that every person has a claim to in the world. I can say that because these are drawn from the Sustainable Development Goals that all of the governments at the United Nations have agreed. They've agreed that nobody should be left in the hole of the donut. You could call it the long history of human rights that's been a conversation and agreement for over 70 years. So leave no one in the hole. But there's a very big 21st century but. As we use Earth's resources to meet our needs for food and housing and transport and energy, we start putting pressure on Earth's resources and Earth's life supporting systems. And so we go out beyond that social foundation towards the ecological ceiling. We put so much pressure, we might actually tip Earth out of balance. And around the outside here are these 9 planetary boundaries that were recognized by scientists just over a decade ago. They said, we think these are like the life supporting systems that keep Earth in a healthy state. And if we go beyond them, then we cause climate breakdown. We can cause a depletion of the ozone layer. We create a hole in the ozone layer. We create air pollution and chemical pollution and the loss of biodiversity, species loss. If we convert too much of Earth's surface and convert too much land for human use, we withdraw too much water from lakes and rivers. And we use too much fertilizer, spraying nitrogen and phosphorus that actually runs off the land and goes into lakes and rivers and kills off aquatic life. These are pressures that we must not exceed a certain limit that's called the ecological ceiling. I can give you an example on climate change. The limit is 350 parts per million of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. We know that actually today, the world went over 422 parts per million. So we're overshooting. We need to stay within these planetary boundaries. So the donut says, leave no one in the hole, but don't overshoot the limits of the living planet. Sounds so simple. Of course, it is a huge challenge to orient ourselves this way. And when you think about this new shape of progress, it's not a line of ever rising growth like GDP. It's about balance. If I do this with my hands, it feels like a heartbeat, finding balance between the social foundation and the ecological ceiling. So we thrive in that safe and just space for humanity in the middle. And when I first drew this, I was really struck by how many people were motivated by it, how many people found it an exciting and very empowering way to talk about a different vision of what human development and progress looks like. And I looked then at the symbols and shapes that have been drawn for millennia by many different indigenous cultures and traditions. And I was amazed to see so many of them are based on a circle with this dynamic feel. So it's as if the Western or global North economic mindset has been the outlier, pursuing growth endlessly. Can we come back and learn from these other traditions, but create our own insight and our own approach to it into a space of balance where we thrive inside the donut? So if the goal is to thrive in the donut, the challenge is we are very, very far from that right now. All of the red in this picture shows you the extent to which people worldwide are falling short on the essentials of life. So this is the whole of the human population. You can see that on food, that little red line goes 11% of the way to the center of the circle, because 11% of people don't have enough food to eat every day. But you can see that's true on all of these social dimensions. There are millions or billions of people falling short on life's essentials. Many of them live in low-income countries, but we know that in the heart of our own cities and nation, there are people living in real deprivation. So these people may live in countries worldwide. And at the same time as there's really severe human deprivation still going on, we've already overshot multiple planetary boundaries. Like I just said, we're way over on climate change because we emit too many greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. We're way over on excessive fertilizer use, that nitrogen and phosphorus. We're applying too much of those chemicals to the land. We're converting too much land for human use, and it's causing the loss of species. So we need to come into this donut-shaped space from both sides at the same time. And that's a huge challenge, and that's a huge opportunity. Can we do it? And what would it take to do it? Now, I'm showing you all countries in the world at the same time. But most policy and action happens much more locally. So let's jump and say, what if we look at national donuts? A colleague of mine with some researchers at Leeds University created 150 national donuts. And if you're interested, I really recommend you go to this website that you can see the list, Good Life at Leeds University. 150 countries, and you can see how each country's changed over time. So we can see at one end, Malawi, lots of red in the middle. Many people in Malawi cannot meet their most essential needs. But you can see that the country's not overshooting its pressure on the planet as a fair share of Earth's resources at all. China has a double whammy challenge, many people falling significantly short on life's essentials and already overshooting multiple planetary boundaries, with around $17,000 per person per year as an income, compared to Malawi, $1,500. Let's go to the UK, $45,000 per person per year. We're doing better in the center. We're one of the world's richest countries. The center of that circle should be totally blue. It could be blue if we chose to make it blue. But of course, let's recognize there are deprivations in the UK that don't show up when we're looking at globally comparable data like this. This is data coming from the UN. So it hides some of the very local challenges that we face. But the UK is really significantly overshooting multiple planetary boundaries, as all high income countries are. And then look at Australia, which is one of the biggest overshooters, an income per capita very similar to the UK, but really significantly depending upon fossil fuels and using Earth's resources. So they've got a big challenge to come back within. Let me put those 4 countries in the context of over 100 countries. So here, you want to go up the scale. You want to have no shortfall on the social, right? 0 people falling short on the social side and not overshooting the planetary boundary. So the sweet spot in this diagram is that top left-hand square that's green. That would be living in the donut. And we can immediately see there are no countries there. Now, here's the UK. We're in a big cluster next to France and the Netherlands and Germany. Let's recognize that every country in the world is on a journey of transformation. So the low-income countries that people have often called developing countries, I don't use that language because I can't see a single country here that should call itself developed. We are all developing countries now. But lower income countries, they need to meet the needs of all people without overshooting the planetary boundaries, that outer limit of the donut, in the way that countries that have gone before them have done. How will they do this? This is an unprecedented journey. We've got countries in the middle. They've got to both meet people's needs and come back within those planetary boundaries. That's not been done before. But then high income countries that people have called developed, our country, look at Australia, Canada, the United States, they have a massive journey to make to come back within planetary boundaries while still meeting people's essential needs. This hasn't been done before. Every nation, in my mind, is a developing country on an unprecedented journey. Now, you can see this as a time of enormous challenge. You can also say it's an incredible time to be reinventing our economies and to be putting new design principles at the heart of what we do. And then let's recognize, lastly, that all of these countries are interconnected. They look like separate dots on the page, but they are connected through histories of colonialism, the UK playing a huge role in that. Through the current status of military power, which has become very, very prominent in the news recently, through trade and finance rules set up by international institutions, through the resource uses of one country by another, through climate impacts, present and future. So every country's story and future is connected to every other's. I look at this and I ask myself, okay, well done, Costa Rica, you're closer than any other country, but even the best country is not there. So what would it take for countries to actually have an economic kind of thinking that would actually bring us into this space? And I'm talking in the space of economics, but I could equally be talking in the space of geography, because I think geography actually has done a lot better at this than mainstream economics. So the geographers are closer, I think, in the thinking. And I hope all these ideas are inspiring to geography as much to transforming economics. What kind of ideas would take us there? I want to start economics again. Forget those first 3 diagrams I showed you. I'm going to start with what I call the first diagram is the big picture of the embedded economy. Let's recognize that our economies are embedded in society. They are a social construct. They're an invention by humanity. And society, human society, is embedded in the living world. We're drawing in living matter and materials. We're putting out waste, and we're bathed in this river of solar energy. So the economy has to work within cycles of the living world. That's the first move. And Ashley introduced me as an ecological economist. If there's one thing that makes you an ecological economist, you show a picture that says, well, the economy is within inside the living world and has to work within it, doesn't it? That makes sense. And that's what it means. It changes everything that follows. But I want to dive inside and say, well, look inside the economy. Yeah, mainstream economics always starts with the market. And there, who would we be? We'd be a consumer or a producer. You're shopping or you're working, or you're shopping or you're working. And in the space of being a producer, are you labor earning a wage, or the owner of the factory or the owner of the land or the housing earning a rent? Karl Marx made a really important point. We have to ask ourselves, who owns the means of production? Are you labor or capital? So that's the market space. And mainstream economics starts there and says, well, if the market can't fix it, if the market can't do it, we'll bring in the state. And so we bring in the state. And who could we be in relation to the state? You might be a public servant, a teacher, a doctor, and a member of parliament. You could be a resident of a place, a voter, or a protester. And I think all of these are important roles that each one of us can play in relation to the state. This is what shows up in GDP, in national income. It's the goods and services that are sold in the economy. But that's only part of the way we meet our wants and needs. Look what's running vertically through this picture. There's the household, where actually most of us are sitting right now in our homes. This is a place where we may be a parent, a partner, a relative, or a child. And we are nurtured by the care, the unpaid caring work of our parents who raise us, the cooking, washing, cleaning, sweeping that makes life work. And then there's the commons that we talk of so little that I think it's really important to think of here. In the commons, we might be a volunteer, a sharer, a co-creator, a steward. The commons is a place where people come together, not through the market, buying and selling, not shaped by the state, but as a community, and says, well, let's make a community garden on the corner of our block on this plot of land. Let's create Wikipedia on the World Wide Web. Nobody's paid to make Wikipedia. And people follow shared rules and collective rules. Then together, when we do that, we can co-create something we really value. So digital life makes the idea of the commons and creating shared value a really new, renewed possibility. So I think of an economy having all of these kinds of provisioning, and finance needs to be in service, not in service to itself. I think we've inherited a financial system in service to itself. It needs to be in service to enabling this real economy to meet people's needs. I think COVID was a really important opportunity to see what happens when the market space is shut down due to the need for physical distancing. A lot of trade, of course, went online, and some people got very, very rich because of that. But we suddenly found ourselves in debates about whose work is essential work, and why is that work, therefore, so low paid so often? We found that the household became an essential place for care, essential place for homeschooling. So a lot of pressure went onto households. And then the commons jumped into action through community kitchens. Now we're seeing it through food banks, through a street WhatsApp group. Many people have said one thing we don't want to let go of after the COVID crisis is that bigger sense of a we. We're not individual, rational, economic now. We are social humans. We collaborate and work together. So how can we have that richer sense of ourselves? So how can we get into the donut with this bigger picture? Let's recognize all of the red here, I believe, is because we have a deeply unequal world where some people are massively lacking on the resources for life and others have far more than they need. And we have a really degenerative world. The way we use Earth's resources is running down the living planet. So I think the two dynamics that I want to put at the heart of donut economics are that we need to become regenerative by design, and we need to become distributive by design. Let me explain what I mean. So we've inherited degenerative linear industrial systems. We take Earth's materials, make them into stuff we want, use it for a while, and then we throw it away. And that is pushing us over those planetary boundaries. We need to turn this into a regenerative economy where resources are not used up, they're used again and again. We repair and we refurbish and we retrofit and we share so that we work within the cycles of the living world. A couple of examples. This is degenerative landscape, deforestation, and it can be restored and brought back. And here's an example from degenerative use of electronics, dumping them in the neighborhoods of some of the world's poorest people? How do we, instead of throwing old stuff away, create a circular economy where we repair and refurbish and reuse everything far more carefully? These are two big transformations from degenerative to regenerative. How do we make our cities regenerative? Look at this district. This is in South Korea, in Seoul. There was a 10-lane highway that had been built over a river. And then they said, let's bring back the river. Look what a transformation it makes. It brings nature and water back to the heart of the city. And then compare these two hospitals. Let's bring it down to the scale of a building. Here's a hospital in the UK. There is not a sign of nature around. And compare that to this nature-rich hospital in Singapore. And ask yourself, which hospital would you rather heal and get well in? Strong evidence shows that people heal quicker and get well when they can see trees and have a sense of nature, because we're ecological beings. So from degenerative to regenerative design, right down to the design of a hospital. There's a second dynamic though. We've inherited economies that tend to be divisive by design, whether through privilege and inheritance, whether through regulations or infrastructure. They often capture opportunity and value in the hands of a few people. How can we instead create economies that share opportunity and value with all who co-create it? What do I mean? Here are a couple of examples. So in the UK, we have a crisis of affordable housing. In London, particularly, social housing can be very low quality and there's a real shortage of it. In the city of Vienna, one of the richest cities in Europe, what many people don't know is that over 60% of the population live in social housing, houses that are owned by the cities or by city-run cooperatives. It's affordable, it's central, it's normal, it's good quality. That's because the city of Vienna decided that housing is not an investment opportunity, it's a human right. So they decided to own the majority of the houses and make sure it's affordable for everyone. I would say that's a great example of distributive design. Think about Airbnb. Many cities are now saying that our city housing crisis is fueled by people buying up apartments all around the city and renting them out through Airbnb. Could you change the design of that? There's now a new company called Fairbnb. They say one host, one house. So if you want to list a house on the platform, you can only own one. You can't own 50. And some of the money that goes from renting out your house goes into local community projects. So it's a really nice example of making sure that the value created from renting flats to tourists actually gets reinvested in community. A couple more examples. In the US and many countries, there are a lot of people who are working, but are actually earning such low wages that they are living in poverty. And in the city of Stockton in California, they decided to introduce something called a guaranteed basic income scheme. They said, let's see what happens if we give $400 a month to people who are on the lowest incomes, and they can use it however they need. A really amazing experiment they ran for 18 months, and they found that so many people use that money to get out of poverty, to invest in getting a long-term job, to take that bus ride, to go for that interview. It gave them the opportunity to take a risk they needed to take to get a step up in life. So guaranteed basic income is one example that a lot of people have been discussing. It's quite a radical policy. Should we actually just give income to the poorest people to ensure that no one is falling short on the essentials of life? And then what about if we think about who owns business? The mainstream we've inherited is the idea that companies are owned by shareholders. And that means that most of the returns and the profits go to the shareholders. Well, what if they were instead going to the people who do the work? In this company in Mumbai, as you can see, the boss is holding up a sign that says, the workers are my boss. And the woman behind him says, I own my fashion factory. This is an employee-owned fashion factory where the value and profits created go to the employees, not to shareholders who might live in a completely different country. It's a really interesting challenge to what we think is normal about who owns business. So these are some examples of moving from degenerative to regenerative, divisive to distributive design. So I've taken us on a journey here from 20th century concepts that I think we should leave behind. I would like to start 21st century economic education in schools and in universities and in policymaking with these ideas, because I think these much better serve our times. So let me introduce one more idea. What happens if we bring this thinking to the level of a city, right? I've introduced concepts and theories, but how does it actually happen in practice? And this is what we're doing at Doughnut Economics Action Lab. So I invite you, wherever you are, a city or a town or a village near you, you can think, okay, how could our city help bring humanity into the donut? Could we live in the donut here? What we do is unroll it and we dive inside it. So when we go inside, now in between the social foundation and the ecological ceiling, we're trying to stand in that safe and just space for humanity. And we ask this question: how can our city become a home to thriving people in a thriving place while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet? That's a very complex question. I'm going to break it down into 4 parts. We've got the local and the global, we've got the social and the ecological. So I'm going to look first at the local aspirations of a place and then at our global responsibilities towards others, because we know we're connected with the whole world. So we can start locally with our social aspirations. How can all the people of our city thrive? What would it mean for everyone in your city to have decent food and good clean water, healthcare, education, good housing, access to clean energy and connectivity and mobility, and I can go on, all of these things, making sure that everybody is included in that. I don't think there's any city in the world that actually can already say everybody has this good standard of life. There are always some people whose voices aren't heard, whose interests are left out. How can we raise that standard? And at the same time as thinking about this, the social quality of life, let's think about the local ecology of place. So how can our city be as generous as the wild land next door? So I'm sitting in the city of Oxford, and if I said, well, where's the wild land next door? There's some woods called Whighton Woods at one end of the city. And if I went there, that would be like the healthy, natural habitat of this place. And this is how nature is generous in this ecosystem where I live. Nature cleanses the air, she houses biodiversity, stores carbon, cycles the water. She's continually reproducing conditions that enable life to flourish. So what if we tried to make our cities as generous as nature? What if our cities stored carbon? We planted trees in them, we had green roofs. What if our cities welcomed pollinators? So we had bee corridors. What if our cities stored water? We didn't have flash flooding on the pavement, but the water soaked through the pavement and was stored in the water table underground until we needed it. So there's all sorts of amazing designs that we can bring into the future of our cities to mimic that generosity of nature, to get rid of the urban heat island effect in very hot cities. I'm thinking right now, you may know and seen in the news, India is experiencing extremely high temperatures due to climate change, well over 40 degrees. The difference it would make if those cities where people are were full of trees versus no trees could actually literally make the difference between life and death, between health and utter heat stress. So bringing nature back into our cities is also a crucial response to climate change and adaptation. So these two are the local aspirations, but we know that every city is connected to places worldwide. Think of the clothes you're wearing right now. Where did the fibers come from, and all the water and the carbon emissions that are embedded in? Think of the food you've eaten today. Where did it come from? And what resources were used to make that? Think of the electronics, the phone, the computer you're using. Where was that made? Which country was it made in? All the resources have gone into that. So how can our city respect the health of the whole planet and all the land that's converted for food to make our electronics? How can we create a circular economy and massively reduce our energy demand? You saw the overshoot of the UK's national donut. This is this question where we say, how do we combat within it? We've massively got to reduce our carbon footprint and our material footprint on the planet. A big journey for every high-income country. And then lastly, but crucially, still thinking of where your clothes and food and electronics came from. Who stitched your clothes? A worker in one of those garment factories, probably on the other side of the world. Who assembled your mobile phone? Who picked and plucked the food that you ate today? Think of people worldwide who are making the materials and the things that we buy in the shops. Think of how they're impacted by climate breakdown. And think of people who are refugees and how they are welcomed or not in cities and countries like our own. So these are the 4 lenses of doing the donut in a place. And what's been really exciting for me in this work, going from the theory of donut economics, I began with, a book, here's some ideas on the page in a book, and then lots of places have said, we actually want to do this in practice. And so turning it into tools like this and actually working with cities worldwide. We began in just before COVID, actually, in Portland and Philadelphia and Amsterdam, but now there are over 30 city governments worldwide that we've not tried to persuade any of them, but all of them have approached us and said, we want to do this here. We think this is a useful tool for transforming where we are. So we're working with them. How can we actually turn this into transformative practice and have cities leading the way to the future? I'm going to give you just a few examples. Cornwall Council took the donut concept and have made it into a really nice visual. So looking at that big one, you can see that they're improving on reducing air pollution, reducing waste, and reducing their impact on climate change, but they've judged they're still putting pressure on biodiversity, chemical pollution, and ocean health. Same on the social story. Through this little visual representation using colors and arrows, they can tell a much richer story than saying GDP in Cornwall went up by 2.2% in the last year. So what? Telling me that GDP is going up or down doesn't tell me anything nearly as valuable as, are we meeting the needs of all people? Are we coming back within the means of the living planet? I think these are the beginning of 21st century metrics, and I'm really thrilled to see some cities and places in the UK leading this. Today, this very day, this workshop happened in the city of Leeds. They started unrolling the donut, launched their city. And if any of you are from Leeds, I really recommend you get in touch, because there's wonderful work happening there, making their own city portrait of the donut, because they're using it as a tool to transform the city of Leeds. And the last one I'm going to show you is that in Birmingham, there's an amazing organization called Civic Square, who are doing the donut at the scale of the neighborhood, street by street, turning it into a game for kids, a conversation for communities, and making these economic ideas really accessible to people who've never studied economics and would probably find economics intimidating. But they've said, no, we can play with donuts. This is a conversation for all of us. Let's transform our neighborhood, because this is what it means to bring ourselves into the safe and just space for the future. So I'm going to stop there and just recap everything I've shared. If we want to turn around this story and get rid of all the red in this picture, we need to create economies that go from being degenerative to regenerative, that go from being divisive to distributed. These are the dynamics I think that policymaking needs to be focused on to turn this story around. I've told you a story of how at Doughnut Economics Action Lab, we're turning these concepts into practical tools that places can use. And now we're learning from policymakers, councillors, mayors, politicians, business leaders, community organizers in these places of how do we actually help turn these theories into practice. So I'm going to stop presenting ideas there. And before we go into questions, I'm going to present a question to you. And this is a question I teach this on a master's course here in Oxford University. And I begin every course I teach this way. So I want to pose it to you today. I've introduced you to the concept of the donut. Now I want to know, do you think humanity can get into the donut by 2050? Could we do this? Could we eliminate all of the red, making sure that nobody in the world is falling short of the essentials of life? And we come back within those planetary boundaries. Can we do it? So 4 possible answers. First, you might say, yes, we can, right? And I want you to take a position here. You can't say, oh, I'm in between. Just take a position for the sake of taking a position. That's why it's called take a stand. Yes, we can. I believe we can do it for whatever reason you believe we can do it. Or you might say, no, we cannot for whatever reason you believe we can't do it. Or you might say, well, whether or not we could do it, I think we should aim for it. We should aim to get into the donut. Or you might say, well, whether we can do it or not, I think we should actually be aiming for something else. This is interesting. It's only one possible goal. You might think there's something else we should be aiming to do. So I'm going to hand back over to Jess, because these are the 4 questions we're going to ask you to vote on or give your view on in a quick poll. Let me hand back over to Jess to hear your views about whether humanity can live in the donut. So,
okay, I've kicked it off. And, oh, very rapid. Well, 78% have participated.
Wonderful. Please do jump in. Jump in. It's
80%.
fascinating. Every time I do this in a room, I'll say that the students, and I usually do it in a room, and I say, right, go and stand in that corner, stand in that corner, stand over there, stand over there. And they're amazed to see their friends standing on the opposite side of the room, like, how can you be standing over there? And it's really interesting to realize that we can have very, very different views. We can all be here in this sustainability network, but have really different views. And there's a real privilege of being able to listen to each other and understand why we hold different views. So I'm looking forward to seeing your different views, because I'm going to bet there's at least somebody in every position. Let's see. But we're going to see your different views, and I'm going to ask, I'd love your responses as to why. So how we
Okay,
doing?
we're up to 92%. So that's probably good to
Let's
end
go
it.
for it.
My dog was voting. I'm afraid it sounded like she was no, we cannot. But so I shut her up. Right, I'm going to end it. What does it do then? Does it flash up?
Yes, should do.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, share results. Right. Are we ready? Drum roll.
Oh, look at that. Wow. Oh, look at that. Wow. This is the most positive and motivated group I've ever done this with. That's really fascinating.
Oh, there we go.
That's really fascinating. So what I'm seeing is, so 20% of people have got this real certainty and clarity that we can. And can I ask you, if you voted, if you're one of the people who said, yes, we can, it would be brilliant if in the chat box right now you can write your reason. There's so many different reasons why you could say that. Would you like to just write your reason? Because it's really great to hear the different reasons that people have for saying that. So I'm going to open the chat box, and I hope to see some answers coming through as to why you say, yes, we can do this.
Okay, I'll stop sharing, yeah?
Well, if you can keep sharing the poll result, is that possible? Anybody going to jump in?
I can't see what it looks like, so
I'm not. I'm not seeing any chat results yet. I was really hoping somebody would say in the chat why.
they're being too erudite, coming up with long sentences or something.
Oh, there we go. Emma says, in the last year, I have seen a huge shift. I really feel that things are changing for the better. So what's really interesting about that is Emma's view, and let's listen to where these views have come from. Emma's view is based on what she's seen, so evidence that she's seen around her. And then Emily's saying we have the resources and passion of the younger generation, right? So a belief in the potential. Sometimes people arguing this, and it's really interesting to ask ourselves, what kind of evidence do people bring, or what kind of arguments do people bring? Some people will bring a statistic, right, and use kind of data that they've got from a scientific report. And here we're seeing evidence and conviction, which all of these are actually really important parts of forming our beliefs and persuading others and justifying why we hold a belief. Thank you, Emma and Emily. That's really great. Now, 80% of you, so the vast majority of you have said, okay, well, whether or not we can, so there's some uncertainty in that possibility, we should aim it. I'm going to just come back to Will. That's great, because humans are fundamentally moral beings and are capable of righting the wrongs of the past. Our generation seems to be, for the first time, capable of seeing the errors of previous generations and taking action to rectify them. So again, echoing the place Emily's coming from, this conviction and belief in the moral possibility and the moral awakening and awareness. That's really powerful. Thank you, Will, for sharing that. That's really compelling. So I'm going to ask people who voted for the 80%. So you said, well, I don't know whether we can or not. I'm unsure, but I think we should aim for it. So I'm going to ask any of you, why should we aim for this? Why is it good to aim for this concept, even if we don't know whether we can get there or not? Why would you say that's the right thing to do? Love to hear some answers. I know they're coming, so I'm happy to wait. And it's a really, while we wait for the answers, I'll say it's a really interesting thing to say, well, I don't know whether I can get there, but I'm going to try and get there anyway. And I'm going to try and follow these principles, holding all of the uncertainty that many, many, many people feel. I don't know if we can do it, but I still feel it's the right thing to try to do. Here we go. Hannah. Honestly, I think that to get into the middle of the donut would require incredible change, which will be difficult. So many people are involved. It's true. So many people needing to act at the same time. It's going to take a lot of time. I think that's a really good point, Hannah. And some people might say, well, I don't think we can do it by 2050. Maybe it's just going to take more time than that. So some people might say, I'd argue a different year, 2070, right? But just because it's difficult doesn't mean we shouldn't aim for it. On this finite planet, there is no room for infinite growth. It's just not realistic. And we should turn and look for other solutions as soon as we can. And if you don't get the whole way, halfway is still better than no way at all. I think that is a really important point. So some people say, oh, it's just too late to act on climate change. It's never too late, because climate change is about every single incremental 10th of a degree. And as we can see what's happening in India right now, it really, really matters whether the temperature is 42 degrees or 43 degrees or 44 degrees. So everything that we do, holding the steadiness and coming back towards the donut, makes a difference in each person's life and in terms of the integrity of the planet. Thank you, Hannah. That's a brilliant answer. So, oh, right, let's take a couple. Somebody's older than Will. My reason being unsure that it can be done is his reason for thinking we can. I don't think we always see the errors of previous generations. People forget. It's true, there are cycles of generation, and we don't always draw on the history of what's happened before. And I'm going to read the last one. You're really welcome to bring more, but I know there might be some questions, but I'm going to recognize that more people are bringing some wonderful arguments from uncertainty, the psychological shift that's required. I'm going to read Ed's point, because if we don't live within ecological boundaries, we will go extinct or have a much reduced population. And if we don't have much more equity, we'll just have to ongoing political unrest. So I'm hearing, what's the alternative? Is there really a viable alternative? We have to reset ourselves in this direction. I have to say, when I present these ideas to policymakers, to governments, to politicians, I can see them realizing, why do we continue to talk about GDP as if that was a good goal for our economies? We need to orient towards this, and we need to find a way to make this our new political conversation. And some politicians really are and starting to talk to this. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you so much for answering this. I'm thrilled that the positive and the sense of ambition in this group is really strong. Kudos for getting the strongest positive result that I've seen so far in doing this poll. So I'm going to hand back over to Ashley and to Louis to say if there are any questions that have been coming up, or any questions you have. If you'd like to raise any questions, I'm really happy. And it doesn't have to be a question, by the way. It can be a view or a suggestion. I would love to hear any of your thoughts in response to what I've shared.
Thank you very much for Kate for talking to us. Let's see if any questions come in.
Louis, there was one already in.
Oh, yeah, I read that.
I sent it in advance. I don't know if she wants to ask it herself. You could maybe see.
Do you know of any economics courses at universities which include studying these issues?
That's a great question. And the really good thing is that more and more students are asking this question. So after the global financial crisis, a lot of students who were studying economics at university at the time were really embarrassed, because they would go down the pub with their friends, and their friends said, come on then, you're studying economics. Why is the global economy collapsing? Why are all the banks going bankrupt? And they said, we don't know. We don't study these things. It's not part of the course. It doesn't fit in the theories that we're taught. And they became so frustrated and embarrassed that they started putting pressure on the university departments, and they formed a brilliant international network called Rethinking Economics. So if any of you are studying economics or interested in studying economics at university, I would really recommend you go and look at this network called Rethinking Economics. It began in the UK, but they connected internationally. And it's a wonderful movement of students, both holding their own university departments to account. And because they're currently the students in these departments, they are in a really good position to say which universities are actually transforming and starting to move the curriculum in this direction. I'm also going to suggest, while thinking of websites, there's another really great website that shows all of the different kinds of economic mindsets. And it's called Exploring Economy. Oh, I'm going to want to Google it in a minute. Exploringeconomy.org, I think it is, exploring-economy.org. And they just present his ecological economics, his feminist economics, his Keynesian economics, his new classical economics, and help you see all the different kinds. Again, if any of you are planning on studying economics at university, I would really recommend looking at that website, because the best thing you can know is that there's no one economics. The textbook makes it look that way, There's many different schools of thought, and it means you can choose which kind of economist you want to be. So just to come back to the question, some universities are starting to adapt, but it's happening too slowly. So I'm not going to recommend a single one, but I would look on the Rethinking Economics website, and I think you'll find students are beginning to rate their universities and they can give you recommendations. So Rethinking Economics and exploringeconomy.org, two fantastic websites for anybody who wants to become a 21st century economist.
I read a book called Econometrics, which is along the similar lines of that, which was to do with some students from Manchester who hated their economics course for that sort of reason. I'm just going to take another bit from Emily's question, and then we'll go to Pim, who's got her hand up. So the last part of Emily's question was, have you ever considered going into politics?
Great question. And hang on, just before I answer it, I'm grabbing the URL for Exploring Economy because I have to recommend it to you. There you are. I popped it in the chat box. Check out that. Have I ever considered going into politics? So, you know, my husband sometimes says to me, oh, go on, you should go on. Why don't you be an MP? And I say, are you kidding? No way. So I'm not going to become an MP. But you know what? I think I am in politics. And here's why. I think being an elected politician is just one way of shaping politics. And once you get elected, you actually, you see, I mean, I think Caroline Lucas to me is a very important politician in the UK. She's the only Green Party politician MP, but she really speaks from this space of social issue and ecological issues, and she challenges growth. She's the only member of parliament I've ever heard stand up in the House of Commons and challenge the idea that our economy succeeds by growing endlessly. It's very, very difficult to do that in the narrow confines of what it takes to win within the political space. I think there's a really important role for people all around those politicians. So I am contacted by politicians all the time. I've had briefings with the Labour Party, with the Green Party, the Liberal Democrats, the Women's Equality Party. They're all really interested in doughnut economics. So instead of saying I'm going to be an MP and then having to choose which party I want to stand for and which constituency I want to get elected in and knock on the doors and persuade people there, I'm finding that by sharing these ideas openly, we're actually being approached by politicians from across the political spectrum, and not only in the UK, in the Netherlands, in New Zealand. I did a webinar for the Kingdom of Bhutan recently, in Mexico, in Malaysia. So I feel like I am in politics and in a place that I've got the freedom to talk about the ideas I really believe in, rather than quite constrained in ways that many politicians are. Now, of course, they're also very powerful. They can actually vote. I can't vote on legislation. But if I can help change their worldview, their mindset, the way they think about the economy, that's a role in politics that I really enjoy playing.
That's great. Pim, you've got your hand up with a question.
Hi, this is more of an open-ended kind of question, but what do you think of universal basic income as a tool for creating a more equitable society?
Thanks, great question. So I shared an example of a guaranteed basic income from Stockton in California, and that's an example of what Pim's asking about, universal basic income. The guaranteed basic income they did it as an 18-month experiment, and it went to the people, as a randomly chosen number of people who live on less than 40% of the median income in that community. So it's not universal. Now, and I don't know if Pim, you're asking particularly about universal basic income, which says that everybody, no matter how rich or poor they are in a country, everybody should receive a basic payment. To answer it quickly, one, I think it's a really important idea to explore, because I think everybody needs to have access to the market. Remember the diagram I showed with the market, the state, the household, and the commons? Many of the goods that we depend upon to meet our essential needs are provided through the market. So I believe it's a human right to have access to the market. And if people are not able to access work, or accessing work that's so poorly paid, they're in work and still poor, then putting in a fundamental payment can totally transform and eradicate some of that deprivation. Whether it's universal and paid to everybody, I think that will be a big jump, and we'd have to ask how much would be needed be paid to make it actually meaningful for people. What I am really excited about, and I think it's important, is that trials are happening in Stockton in California. There was one in Finland. I think the city of Glasgow is planning on going ahead and doing one. There's a long-term one going on in Kenya. So to me, I would say 21st century economics will be practiced first and theorized later. What do I mean? I think we're going to learn what works by trying it out. And so experimental policymaking is really important. And we're seeing experiments in this policymaking. So from Stockton, some people might say, I think it's a ridiculous idea and people will just waste it. Well, let's see what happens. Turns out people actually use that money really wisely and transform their own circumstance. So by running trials and experiment, we can learn how policies can best be designed. So I think we're in a very important phase of learning how that works.
Okay, thank you very much, Kate, for talking to us. It's been great to get some insight on the issues of thinking about the economy and economic problems in terms of creating endless growth and rebalancing our thought process into thinking of issues in terms of a balancing act between social and environmental variables closest to the definition of economics and how to allocate scarce resources. There's a few more questions and I'm not sure what to do about them because we are out of time.
So I wonder what we've done before, but this is completely up to Kate, is that if people need to go, because it was due to finish now, then they go, but only if Kate's happy to stay on, if anybody wanted sort of for
I'd be happy to stay another 10 minutes, absolutely.
That's really, really good of you. I'm just bear with me. I just need to do just a few notices before anybody rushes off, just about UKSN matters, which all seems a bit sort of mundane and prosaic, but important nonetheless. So if this is your first UKSN experience and you enjoyed it, then you can email that address there to find out about you or your school joining us. This Sunday is the deadline to have your say on the new Department for Education climate strategy. Big deal that. I've put that in the chat, the form, and we'll be issuing a response on behalf of students and staff. For UKSN reps, there's the meetings coming up. We have established our board for decision making. So Eleanor from London, Georgiana from Berkshire, Jack from Somerset, Pim from Avon, Zane from Yorkshire, and a student from Mersey will be the student reps. So that's very exciting. We're going to have a final event of the summer term open to anybody who's connected with UKSN Thursday, 23rd of June. Probably careers and some kind of fun. And then if you would like to join, Kate mentioned White & Woods, and we're actually going there in July. So there's just very, very few places, particularly in the boys' dormitory. So there is the link if you'd like to apply for a place for that. And anybody who already signed up, you should have got an email from me today with details about it. Okay, and there's some reading recommendations that are being discussed by UKSN at the moment. First two are probably more for staff. Second two of interest to anybody, and you can see some of them are written by UKSN friends, and we should add Kate's Doughnut Economics to that as well. Okay, that's it from me. So if people need to head off, obviously feel free, but we've got just a few minutes maybe to tackle some of the questions that are still coming in. Ashley, I think, has got to head off. Louis, I don't know if you want to carry on fielding the questions.
Yeah, I can do that for a few minutes.
Thank you, Ashley, for being a joint compare.
It's been absolutely brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley.
Okay, so do you think it's easier to resolve the shortfalls or the overshoots?
Oh, that's the question of the century. Well, the thing is, I don't think we'll do either of them without the other. Because, like, if I said, okay, if I said, right, I care most about social justice and ending poverty and human deprivation. I'm not really into the environment, so I'm going to focus on the hole in the middle of the donut. I want to focus on making sure that everybody has enough food and water and housing and education and health, and it leads a long, healthy, secure life. We're never going to do that if we don't tackle climate breakdown, because like I just gave this example in India, you could say, I'm going to eliminate poverty in a neighborhood in India, in parts of India that are experiencing these extreme temperatures. But if we continue to put this pressure on the planet, it will undermine the very prospects of human development. In fact, let me tell you a little story about this. I worked at Oxfam for a decade, and in around 2006, some of us in Oxfam were very increasingly concerned about climate change, but Oxfam didn't work on these issues at all. Oxfam said, no, we work on helping people get out of poverty, and we provide health and education and women's empowerment. And when we said, we think we should be working on climate change. And the head of Oxfam at the time, she said, but we're not an environmental organization. Now that was in 2006, when it was still very separate. You know, are you into social justice and tackling poverty, or are you into environment? Are you a greenie? And to her credit, the head of Oxfam, within a year, realized, and we convinced her, that if we don't work on environmental issues, if we don't work on protecting the stability of the climate, it is going to undermine all of the work that Oxfam does. You can give out as many packets of seeds and dig as many wells as you like, but if the rain isn't coming, what use is that? So Oxfam then pivoted actually and really began campaigning on climate change from around 2007, 2008. So that was a moment that organization realized these things happen together. So for me, it's about seeing both sides at the same time. And I'm seeing in more and more policymakers and more organizations that realize, oh, I don't have to be either for social justice or the environment. It actually doesn't even make sense to say I'm for one or the other. We need to do them together. And bringing these things together is what makes the interesting solutions come through. Oh, it means we need a circular economy. We need to be regenerative and distributive. I have to care about them both at the same time. It makes it more complex. It makes it more interesting. And I think it'll actually make it work. It won't work if we don't care about the one or the other.
Okay, and then there's two very similar questions. What can young people do to encourage adoption of doughnut economic principles? And then the extra bit from the other similar question was that how can young people bring about change and reshaping our economy?
Wow, those are big questions. So, well, I think it would be so easy for me at this point to do what so many people say. Oh, you know, it's up to your generation. I mean, rubbish. It's up to my generation to fix right now the systems that we actually have control of. So it's up to today's politicians who are my age and my generation to put in place different policies and to put in place the regulation and to stop drilling for oil and gas in the UK and to start actually delivering on the action that's needed now. The younger generation around the world has done phenomenal work over recent years through Fridays for Future, through so many movements of raising awareness and putting, I think, really important moral pressure on our older generation who are currently in power. And I'll also say, I think we need to teach differently in universities and in schools. We need to rewrite the textbooks. So what can younger people do? When you learn these ideas, certainly you can advocate for them. If they're compelling to you, then bring them into your studies, bring them, if you say, for example, you said, right, you're studying at school, raise it with your geography teacher, raise it with your economics teacher, raise the difficult questions. Why do we assume that the economy should grow endlessly? It will be an uncomfortable conversation with many economics teachers, I'll be honest, because it actually challenges the fundamentals of the economics that has been taught. So it's also a certain personality who's willing to bring that challenge, and not everybody wants to. Some people would rather actually say, okay, how do I start living these in my life? So let me think about in my own home, how do I eat? What kind of foods do I eat and what do I not eat? How do I travel? What do I think is a good holiday? Where's a good place to go on holiday? Do we need to fly across the world, or can we have a really good holiday nearby that I can get to by train or by bike? Where do I save my money? Which bank? Which bank do you open a bank account with? What's that bank doing in the world? What are they doing with your money? How does your family power your home? Is it possible to switch your electricity account to a different provider. So there's lots of ways that you in your own thinking about yourself as an economic actor in the world, the way we invest and divest and spend, and when you get to vote, who you're going to vote for. I think all of these ways we do it actually shape our behaviors, because one piece of research is really important, that people are most influenced by those around them. So if somebody in your group says, I'm going to become vegan because I believe it's really important to massively reduce our footprint on the planet, and meat has a very, very high impact, or says, I'm going to always bike to school. I don't want to live from my parents anymore because I think I should bike. The more that it's those people who start changing their behavior, that has a huge influence on those around us. We're very social beings. We like to be like those around us. So when other people start changing, that's what persuades us to change. So you don't have to make a big noise about it, but when you start changing your behavior, it also influences others. I've only touched on a couple of things that I think a younger generation can do. And I will say that I think the ideas that I'm sharing today, like many other ideas of new economics that are coming through, I've been teaching at Oxford University for 10 years, right? I teach a group of master's students from all around the world. Over the last 10 years, I've seen a huge change in their expectations and their worldview and the assumptions and their demands of what they're taught when they arrive. They want to be taught a much more ecological standpoint. They want to be taught a decolonized form of knowledge. They bring racial justice and ecological and climate justice into the classroom in a way they didn't 10 years ago. So I'm really encouraged by the conviction that many young people are holding and bringing to educational institutions and helping transform the curriculum through their expectation of something that's actually fit for the education they know they need.
Lou, I was going to say that was probably a good point to end on there and let Kate go.
Yeah, okay. There was another question that just came up, but I don't know if I should ask it.
You judge, Louis. If you want to ask it, you ask it. I'm all right.
It's a big one, so I'll do it. How could the idea of redistributive and donut economics come into globalization and into countries where cheap labor is quite large?
Oh my goodness, that's a very big and complex and subtle and excellent question. I'm not going to try and answer that because I won't do justice to it, but whoever asked that question is onto something good and smart. And I would say, if you're thinking about, so you're talking about global supply chains, how do we make those global supply chains not only regenerative by design, but also distributive by design? Many workers who are involved in global supply chains are paid incredibly low wages at the end of those supply chains. They can be very exploitative. I'm going to give a quick answer. I would go to the question of who owns the companies and how are the companies designed that are controlling those global supply chains? They're often multinational corporations. And in fact, you're prompting me, every company that I ever engage with, whether I love it or hate it, whether I want to work alongside it or challenge it, I ask these 5 questions, and I invite all of you, when you encounter a company, ask these 5 questions. What is its purpose? Why does this company exist? What is it serving in the world? How is it networked? How is it relating to its employees, its suppliers, and its customers? And how does it share its values with them? How is that company governed? Who has voice and a say in how decisions are made? And what are its metrics of success? But now we're going deeper, it's getting more powerful. How is the company owned? You saw the example I showed. Is the company owned by shareholders, or by a private family, or by a founding entrepreneur, or is it owned by its employees or its customers? And how is it financed? Because how it's owned determines how it's financed, where the money is coming from, and what that finance is demanding. If it's demanding a high return, it's probably going to be employing people on very extractive wages, or if the finance is invested in the purpose. So this is the design of companies. You got to be going into a whole other area, Louis. This opens up a whole other thing. But to me, this is really key. And I invite all of you to be detectives about the world of business. Ask these 5 questions. And if you know how these deep design traits of a business, you probably know a lot about how that business performs in the world and what it can be or do in the future, whether it can transform or not. Let's leave it there. That's a big one.
Yeah.
A great question.
Okay, that's the last question anyway. So yeah, that's a good place to leave it.
Great.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Well done everybody for all those really good questions. Brilliant hosting from Louis and Ashley, who had to rush off there. And thank you to all the staff for all your support, and students for all rocking up. A really good start to the summer term there, really thought-provoking. So thank you, Kate. We're real coup to get you to come along and talk to us. And thank you to Phoebe Mortimer from the Oxford Network, who set up the connection for us. So yeah, have a good donut tea.
Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure joining you. And I have to say, gosh, if I was a school student and this kind of network had existed and I'd known about it, that would have made a huge impact in my life. And so I think it's just brilliant that you connect this way. And here's to the connections you make and the work that you do through this network. And I look forward to bumping into many of you again in the future. Thanks so much.
Thank you.